All right guys, Kenny here. We're back on this snow thrower. I just wanted to show you something that screwed me up big time. Hopefully it'll help you out. I'm going to grab the new bearing and the old bearing and I'm going to show you something. I'm not going to put these bolts in yet, these carriage bolts. My trick is I use a rubber band underneath this plate and the rubber band will hold them on. See, they're not full square holes. If you just try and put those shoulder screws in, the carriage screws, they'll fall in. So I put the screws in, I put this on it, but before this goes all the way down, I put a rubber band around to hold the screws in. But what I want to show you is, here's the old bearing. Now, the old bearing is pretty messed up. It is wallowed out and destroyed, okay? The new bearing, brandy new. All right, nice bearing. Bronze inner, and there's a head. If you notice on the other side, there's a head on the bushing, okay? Here's the problem that I had. When I took this bearing assembly and I pushed it down on the shaft, okay? So it matched up with the holes, okay? That keyway, it was partially blocked. So when I put the thrust washer on it, I couldn't get the key in, okay? Problem was, if you look at the key, where are you here, folks? Here we are. If you look at the key, it's a partial Woodruff key that's got a flat on either side, okay? And if you notice on that side, it's bent up. See how it's straight across right here? It's supposed to be straight across. See how it's bent up? Whoever played with this had the same problem I had. And what it was, when this bearing failed, okay? When this bearing failed, the inner part of the bearing fell down the shaft. I didn't know the inner part fell out. I didn't see it here. I thought it was just totally disintegrated and destroyed. Well, what happened was the head of the bushing wore its way off, okay? This bushing fell down the shaft. When I took off the bearing, I noticed this here. I thought it was another thrust bearing. No, it's part of the original bushing on the new bearing, okay? And this sleeve was acting like a spacer, and I couldn't push that bearing down all the way to get the key properly in. About 80 thousandths of the keyway was blocked by the bearing. I'm like, why isn't this going down all the way? So basically, I was loosening the auger, figuring, let me see if I could bring the shaft up. And no matter how much I tried, I was tapping on it, this thing was sitting underneath. The actual bearing itself was sitting underneath because the head had worn off and it just fell down. Once my good friend Tom in Australia, we're talking on the WhatsApp there, on the FaceTime, and I pull out this thing. He goes, Kenny, isn't that the inside of the old bearing? And I'm looking at it and it's all chewed up. And I'm like, son of a gun, Tom, it's the bearing. This bearing inside, the actual bronze bearing sleeve, fell down onto the shaft. I thought it was a spacer collar. No, it was the old bearing. And it just so happens, if this sleeve falls all the way down, it'll hold this spherical bearing about 1/8 of an inch too high. The key won't go all the way in, and the pulley won't be located correctly. So make sure when you're changing out these spherical bearings on Toro snow throwers, make sure if the bearing comes out like this in like 3 pieces, make sure you remove this piece, the inner piece. Because the way this bearing was from the factory, you had the bronze piece in here with the head on it, 1-piece bushing. All right, it wore the head away and it dropped that bushing down. Remember to take it apart. So now if you notice, I've got a good almost 1/8 of an inch to the keyway. Whereas before, that keyway was hidden by this bearing and this key never would go in. It was always hitting. All right, just a tip, guys, when you're putting these in, make sure the bearing is completely out, especially if it's disintegrated. All right, that's a tip for now. We'll talk to you soon.